Ready Player One was set in 2045. Is that realistic when in 2025 adoption is still pretty niche? What gives? Is the metaverse dead? Is $70 billion a year market just going to fizzle out to nothing? And will we ever get the OASIS?
It feels like every like 4 to 6 months, there's another round of headlines that are like, VR is dead, XR is dead. It's been declared dead a lot for something that's still going, just maybe a bit slowly.
And I do think that the metaverse, as it maybe was traditionally, is undergoing a bit of a rebrand. I'm seeing spatial computing a lot more. And that might be because metaverse has just accrued too much baggage that people don't want, or too many associations that people don't necessarily want anymore.
I don't know that it represents what people really want, but I think, like, for the purposes of saying, is the metaverse dead? When is it coming? Why hasn't it happened yet? I do think we have to define what we're talking about when we say the metaverse, because I do think there's a lot of valid definitions out there, but I think for the purposes of this, we'll anchor it in a definition that we talk about, go from there. So for this conversation, the metaverse would be a world where digital, physical, and virtual realities are merged, where users or people interacting in this world can interact, they can create, they can collaborate in these immersive environments that are real time, just like they would in the real world. The technologies that we typically talk about when we're talking about the metaverse would be VR, AR, but AI and blockchain also play a role. And it's really envisioned as this persistent space, not something that you come in and out of, where people can work, in commerce, socialize, all the things. For our conversation today, when we talk about why hasn't it happened yet, how are we going to get there? Are we going to get there? We should focus on spatial 3D experiences rather than a digital world that's accessed through a 2D screen. I would not include Second Life as an example of the type of metaverse experience that we're defining today.
Yeah, also digital worlds that you access through a 2D screen. So like Roblox, Minecraft, Second Life, Fortnite. Those platforms have 600 million monthly active users. There's no real question that people have adopted those particular products. Like they have product market fit. They're good. When people talk about metaverse adoption, they're talking about the things that you said, augmented, mixed, and virtual reality or extended reality, spatial computing, whatever label you want to put on it. And those things are typically accessed through a headset or through a phone with pass-through turned on, so you can see your real environment with a digital overlay.
That makes sense. Let's level set where adoption is today. So you said we have 600 million users in virtual games like Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite. And I'm going to refer to my notes for some of these stats here. We do have 141 million people worldwide who are using VR and accessing the metaverse. 49% or so of those people are using a Meta Quest to interact with the metaverse. 31% are using a PlayStation VR, 12% an HTC Vive, and 6% with the Valve Index. If you don't own a headset of any kind, but you're still interacting with the metaverse, there's an 80% utilization rate. There is evidence that there is product market fit compared to how many people there are in 2D equivalent or other types of apps. That adoption is not mainstream. Those are not numbers that we would call mainstream adoption. What I think has people worried that we talk to or that we see in this space is that the amount of dollars being poured in to make the metaverse happen is not resulting quickly in a proportionate adoption. So Zuckerberg is spending 12 billion a year, so 1 billion a month. I haven't been able to visit the Oasis yet, even on that 1 billion a month burn. Why is that? And I think we should talk a little bit about what are the challenges that we see or that we think there are in between the current adoption rate and Ready Player One, where everyone's interacting with the Oasis every day.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think there's obviously like a very long list of things that need to happen before we get to that kind of adoption and that kind of state. But I think the top three, the really big ones that we haven't been able to, fully crack yet is interoperability, which we can talk about what that means, content creation, and then the hardware itself. So do you want to talk about interoperability and what that means?
Sure. At its level, the interoperability challenge is that there is no one who creates a business today and then makes a website for their business and doesn't expect that anyone can access their website, regardless of if they're using a desktop, a laptop, a phone. If they're publishing it on the internet, They expect it to be accessible to everyone. That is not true today. Even if you use the best of the best in terms of industry standards, so like you're building an open XR, if you're interacting with digital twins, you're using OpenUSD, even if you're using what's considered the industry standard, you still cannot today, as a developer who wants to contribute to the metaverse, build an app that doesn't require adaptation to go from one platform to another. If you own an HTC Vive and I own a Meta Quest, and we both want to play an app together, we have done custom development to make it work so you and I cannot join a common game, right? And this is true across all of them. Now, you could say that the interoperability is just the nature of the technological development and where we are. The problem is if you don't solve the interoperability problem, you really limit your ability to access users, and then you limit the ability for users to adopt it. So if you're a developer today building something and you look at the stats we listed earlier about what hardware are people using to access these devices, the first thing you're going to do is go to phones, because everyone has those, but not all phones are equipped, although most of the modern day ones are. And then two, you're going to go to Quest, because that's where the majority of the users are, right? But again, even with Quest, there are limitations like on the pass-through API and things that you can and can't do on that headset that you can do on other headsets. So yeah, we could go on and on about interoperability for a very long time, but at its core, the technological underpinning is just not there to make it true so that as a developer or a publisher of metaverse content, that you can guarantee that it's accessible to anyone who has a computing device.
Yeah, I think we can maybe ground this in an example, and you'll let me throw one out there and you can tell me if it's correct. But so say for example, I have a Quest and I'm gonna go put on my Quest and play Beat Saber. Awesome, right? If you're right next to me and you have an HTC Vive and you also want to play Beat Saber with me, there's no way to do that today. I don't even know if Beat Saber is available on Vive.
I don't even know if it is. It might be. I don't have a Vive. I haven't used one lately, so I don't know. But yeah, that's exactly it.
It's like today, if you couldn't access like Instagram from an Android device, like you could only, if it was only on iOS and you can only access it on one of those devices, that's sort of the equivalent of where we're at with XR. And that was true for mobile in the early days. Things were locked into one platform because the developers didn't have the bandwidth to put an application out everywhere, and the user bases were concentrated in different ways. So it's not that it's an abnormal stage or phase to go through. It's just where we're at right now. And it is, probably hindering adoption because, I don't want to go pay for Beat Saber on 4 different devices if like that's what I have, which I probably do have like 5 devices in this house, but that's a hazard of being in the industry.
Yeah. It's another challenge that you think stands in the way of adoption rates today and adoption rates that you see in these sci-fi things like Ready Player One.
Yeah, Ready Player One is a tough example to draw from because that entire world was built by a company, right? I don't know that that is realistic to expect that, is Meta
or ideal
or ideal, right? Yeah. Like, do you really want your entire digital world dictated by one corporation or any corporation? Who knows? But yeah, so this kind of brings us to like, once you have the hardware, and we have hit a bit of a wall on hardware development at the moment, I think AI and quantum computing may swoop in and kind of accelerate things a little bit. But, at this particular time of recording, things have like stagnated a bit. So what happens kind of going through the natural development cycle? Companies spend a lot of time and money developing the hardware, and then they go to launch this fantastic device that they have built and realize that people won't use it unless there's apps that run on those devices. We have experienced this with hardware companies coming to us and being like, hey, please build apps that work here. So we have a bit of an app deficit. There's lots of companies that have ported over mobile apps to make them run in XR, but they're not really XR native. They're not optimized for spatial computing, but that's okay. Like, it's not an uncommon occurrence, especially, for a technology that's new. But we arrive at this point because it is uncommon for a company to be good at developing hardware, developing software, and developing content. Like Apple does it, Microsoft does it, Meta is trying to do it. And for all of those companies, it took decades to get to that point where they can do all three. And it took a lot of acquisitions. They didn't home grow everything. They purchased the capabilities that they then bought in-house. So like I said, Meta's trying to do the same thing. They have the Quest, they have all of their apps that run on that device, and then they're trying to do content creation as well. I think Meta purchased Beat Saber. That was their content creation. They bought it, and that's great. But the assets that Meta has under that umbrella, they do all those things independently, and then they've had to knit them together. And that's a challenge. And I don't know how the other companies like Apple is going to solve that, how Microsoft will solve it, other than just buying more companies that specialize in those things. Where we get to at this point is we're going down to a level where we need to have user-generated content if there's going to be enough content to go around. And the whole point of the metaverse is to create digital worlds that don't exist in real life. We would like users be able to do that on their own. Not all of the content is going to come from an app or headset provider. So one of the roadblocks is we need a way for users to make their own stuff without being a developer or a 3D modeler or, a metaverse developer. We're tackling that a little bit with Katana. Well, actually, we're tackling that a lot with Katana, where we offer the no-code metaverse content creation that you do on a desktop and then you push it to the device. And I think AI, this is a separate topic, but I think AI is going to help out a lot with asset generation because people who have not worked with 3D models in the past can just type out what they need and one will be created. I could go on a lot about the content side of things because it's one of the topics that's near and dear to my heart, but that's all I'll say for now. Did you want to talk about hardware? The elephant in the room?
I think the other thing that I would think about content, not to tie it all back to interoperability, but with Katana, you can publish to multiple headsets because of how we built it. There are tools out there, but then they're often exclusive to the headset. So they have low code things where you can build a game, but then it will only run on something specific. And this does also feed into hardware because part of the reason this is hard is because the form factor here has to follow the use case rather than the other way around. And because we're still figuring out product market fit in all these areas of XR, figuring out what the right form factor is for the use case is arguably very hard. The example I'll give is, as a millennial, I will shop on my phone and I'll shop for like little things and big things. I'll look for houses, right? I'm not going to file my taxes on my phone. As a business owner, I will leave myself voice notes and notes of ideas I have of maybe a government proposal we're working on. But when it actually comes to put pen to paper and to build that narrative, I'm going to go to a desktop to do it. There's this push and pull of wanting the convenience in the smallest possible form factor, which I think is the narrative that's predominant within XR is just make it smaller, make it lighter, make it smaller, make it lighter. It depends on what it is you're trying to do. If you're just trying to quickly check what the weather is or upload your directions so you can watch where you're going while enjoying the scenery, yeah, that should be a really light, really small headset. If you're trying to visualize dense 3D data, say a flight you just flew, the mission debriefing stuff we worked on, weather, you need more compute power to do that. So you either have to offload that compute, you have to have a tethered headset, or you have to have a headset that has a pack. So I do think in many ways, hardware might be the biggest barrier to adoption because the processing power for a highly graphical intensive experience, whether you're talking about augmented or virtual reality, the device has to be big. And that drives down the amount of time someone wants to spend in a device, right? Like 2 to 3 minutes, maybe max 10. If you could get the Apple Vision Pro experience on something that looked like a Ray-Ban, we'd be having a different conversation about adoption right now. You mentioned earlier, but Microsoft dropped their quantum chip, so who knows? A cheaper, sleeker headset might be closer than we thought because of that. That might solve some of this compute problem. But also, if I could to chat GPT through a light pair of glasses, I think I would use it all the time. I ask a million questions to my phone all day. Being able to do that to a pair of glasses would be great. But I do think there's still going to be a place in the market for these heavier duty headsets for certain use cases. So I think trying to evaluate a headset that's on the market is very hard unless you're evaluating it against a very specific use case. Like you can't evaluate a Vario XR4 the way that you would evaluate the Meta Ray-Bans. You just can't. They're trying to do two different things.
We talked about this a bit before. I think you came up with this analogy that headsets are going to be closer to cameras than they are to laptops. Like I have a different camera depending on what I want to go photograph or film. I might just use my phone. I might use that film camera over there. I might use my DSLR, or I have a retro camp snap camera around here somewhere that's like a early 2000s style digital camera. I'm going to use a different camera depending on what I want to shoot. I think you're right in that XR headsets, you're going to pick up a different one potentially depending on what you use it for the most. Not everyone is going to have an XR4 rig in their house, but a lot of people might have something that is Ray-Bans Meta-esque, right? Like at that level. And maybe depending on what you're into, how much gaming you do, what your job demands are, you might have something that is a little more intrusive and with a bit more computing power. It's not going to be one headset to rule them all.
No, it will not. Okay, the three top challenges were hardware, content creation, interoperability. Out of everyone that is using these headsets today, this technology to say, despite those challenges, what do we think they're doing? And what does that tell us about where the adoption might continue to grow, where it might come first, where it might come last? Curious what you think about this.
Yeah, so a majority of the hardware users, so of that 171 million, give or take, a majority of those are using the metaverse for gaming. Not a huge surprise. Games lend themselves really well to the use case. So outside of gaming, we have corporations that are using VR for training, and we also see traction in aerospace and defense, which a lot of people are surprised to hear. But when you drill down, pilots are used to training in simulators, which is really just a full VR experience. So doing similar kind of activities, but in a smaller form factor headset actually isn't that big of a behavioral change. If anything, it's easier to pull out a headset and run through a training than it is to go to the simulator and power it up and sit in it. So that's where a majority of the traction is today. And we tend to see the gaming side of things reported on the most because that's the most accessible. But these more less sexy enterprise use cases, they're happening. People are spending the money, but it's not that interesting to write a headline about how this company is using VR to do onboarding. Like that's, no one cares.
It's also difficult to quantify. I think you and I both know from having worked corporate jobs, like there is a bunch of process improvement that you do that is difficult to distill down to like, here was the concrete value to the business besides just it was better, there was less friction and people hated it less while going through it. It doesn't mean that it didn't add value, but it does mean that sometimes distilling that value down into something financial can be tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's lots of science, like we have lots of research, which is nice, that shows what the improvements are with using augmented or virtual reality for learning and training activities versus, PowerPoints or computer-based training. There's like a pretty decent set of data that shows you have better retention if you learn certain things in a spatial environment versus trying to read it off of a screen. So, there's some quantifiable pieces there, but yeah, like you said, a lot of it is just the qualitative feedback of, well, onboarding sucked less this time, or the training was less brutal, maybe because I could do it in, 15 minutes instead of 4 hours. But that's also harder to justify as a business decision. Like, oh, people really enjoyed it. Can we spend a bunch of money on it? Like sometimes that works, but not always. What else have we got here? Do you want to go into the how to get metaverse ready?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Question that we get asked a lot, which is if you're a business who's not yet using a type of metaverse product in your run of business, but you do believe, like we do, that it will be a technology that does change the way that we work and live, how do you make your business metaverse ready so that you can capitalize on the benefits of the technology when the challenges start to get resolved and the adoption starts to catch up?
Yeah, I know it's a question we are asked quite a bit. And first, I'm going to reiterate what I said at the beginning. I think the term metaverse is going through a rebrand. So if you're looking ahead for the next, kind of technology iteration, I'd look for spatial computing. It might yield better results. As for what to look for, I would look for opportunities where you can use the technology as it stands today to solve a problem. So if you sell a physical product, do you offer virtual try-ons? Do you offer see it in your space? I don't know what that product is called, but where you can like place your IKEA furniture in your living room and see how it looks. That's augmented reality. Do you have that available? Are you using it? It's been shown to, increase conversions and sales and things like that. If your business has a heavy training or onboarding component to it, can you streamline that experience with VR and, potentially have to train people less often because their retention is better? If your business already uses 3D assets, like if you're an engineering firm and you have a bunch of 3D models, can you be getting a better ROI out of those assets by using them in XR somehow, even if it's for marketing? The other thing I would say is go and experiment with free 3D asset generation with AI. There's a couple of them out there now. And if that sounds a little too intimidating, you could start with trying to author a mixed reality workflow for free. You can do that with our app Katana. But my biggest caution is don't wait around and let someone else from a consulting firm or wherever tell you the best way to implement the technology. You need to go find that out for yourself. Especially if you're a business owner. For the love of God, do not wait for the industry or for someone else to tell you the best way to use it. It is going to be such a case-by-case basis, in my opinion.
I think the other one that always comes to mind for me when we're getting asked this question of like, how do I be metaverse ready? And maybe this is the nature of the markets that we've operated in. This is something that you articulate to people all the time. You can't jump to industry 5.0 if you're on industry 2.0. So if all of the knowledge on how your business is run and how people build, maintain, sell your physical product, as an example, or digital product, if that is all on paper, or if that is in someone's brain, get it out and get it into a digitally native. If you do sell physical products, do you have 3D models of them? And are those 3D models in commonly held formats? We don't want custom proprietary formats. We want FBX, we want OBJ, we want OpenUSD, because that will enable it to be easier to bring your content into the metaverse without having to learn how to code. If you have the content in images, in PDFs, in Word documents, like anything that can then be extracted down to a JSON structure, then it's much easier to then take that and put it into the metaverse. If it's in a binder, in a filing cabinet somewhere, much harder. So businesses that think that their line of business isn't digitally native, I would argue, even if it's not metaverse, you're going to take advantage of, maybe it's AI, beginning to digitize your content and your knowledge base will only make it easier as these technologies increase in adoption and increase in usefulness for you to then take advantage of them in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, and that has the added bonus. It also sets you up really well to take advantage of AI. The omnipresent AI will eventually need access to your data, whether that's personal data, business data, whatever. If that data is sitting in a binder in a box under someone's desk, so until the robot apocalypse, we won't be able to access that. So taking the time to make sure all of that is digitized and in, like Sofia said, a common format is a really good use of time.
It is. I think we take it for granted because we are a remote company, so everything we do is digitally native. But I think about like when we decided to onboard business AI agents, I promise this is a short tangent and we should do a whole other episode about how we use AI to help us run our business. It was minutes of us training the model, of being like, here's our brand kit, here's our past proposals, here's our case study, here's all of these things you need to know, because all of that content was already digitally native. So if our onboarding process with those small business AI agents had been higher, I feel like it would have been harder for us to extract value out of it quickly. But because it was so easy for us to very quickly take all of the relevant digital content and feed it and then be able to start using it and see that the AI was referencing the content that we'd given it, it was like, oh, this is useful and this is useful fast. So I think we take it for granted again because we're a remote company who has always had to operate in a digitally native context. But if you haven't, that's definitely something that can fall by the wayside.
Oh, for sure. And I was actually just thinking, like, a lot of bigger companies, like we came from big corporates where at the C-suite level or at the leadership level, like they have all, yes, everyone's like 100% digitally native, like, yeah. And for those people, that's true. But then it doesn't trickle down. You get down to the individual developer level or individual engineer level, and you find out, oh, this person's actually been keeping all of their spec sheets printed out in a drawer. And
or on a Word file on their local drive.
Yeah.
Still digitally native, not very accessible to the business.
Right? So you have to make sure that that trickles down. And for us, like our org's pretty flat. Like I could, we can do that pretty quickly. But yeah, I agree. The AI agent thing would be a fascinating episode because, I say all the time, like we'll ask it a question or have it do something for us and we get this great answer. And I'm like, I love AI. And then I see other people that are just like bashing their heads against the wall because the answers that they're getting are just like so mediocre. And it's like, it's such a disconnect, right? And I'm like, yeah, but when you have the data to do it right, it works really well. But you have to have the data and have it there and have it accessible to enjoy those benefits. And yeah, no, that was a great call out. Digitize your knowledge into a common format
as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
Okay, before we have to jump off and we start getting slacked, what have you been listening to? What is on your recently played list?
Ooh, so this week I actually just finished, or no, I'm like halfway through the episode, so hopefully the second half of it is as good as the first half. But I've been listening to the Financial Diet episode called You're Being Gaslit by Generational Wealth, which is a great title. It's hosted by Chelsea Fagan, and she's just had some singers lately. The episode I listened before this one was called It's Low-Key Giving Recession, and I completely understand why that one got a lot of listens.
These are great titles.
Right.
Tier, love it.
But yeah, and it's been fascinating. I was, today years old when I found out that grown adults, people my age, have parents helping them put down payments on houses, even though they have full-time jobs. So who knew? How about you?
Mine's a repeat. You're already sick of me saying this, or you're about to be, but I started listening to We Are Legion, We Are Bob, because it's so good. And it's not a podcast, it's an audiobook. But you've heard this, but it's so enjoyable to re-listen to it because there's so much more to it. It is space sci-fi set in the future where we can create through artificial intelligence from human intelligence. And then those artificial intelligence can go explore the universe and meet aliens and explore black holes and 3D printers in space and all of the cool things. It's such a fun read. You can tell it was written by an engineer, but in a way that's so accessible. Like, we're not technical, but we it. And I know I've already made you listen to this and I'm making James listen to it now, but it's just so good. This is like my third re-listen now, I think, and it is so wildly entertaining, and I just can't not love it. And I need the author to write, I think there's 5 books now. I need there to be like at least 5 more because there's so many fun adventures that these AI can go on in the universe, in the galaxy, and I want to read them all. Every single one.
Yeah, how crazy is it that, like, I forget when I'm reading or listening to that one that the main character actually isn't human.
Yeah. So crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. The idea of like human machine interface, like a whole new view. Yeah. It's a great one. But yes, We Are Legion, We Are Bob. Listen to it on audio and you can tell, I feel like it really comes across that it was written to be listened to. So it was one of the first audiobooks I listened to. I've always been like a physical book reader, obviously, but this one I like converted me to audiobooks.
Yeah, there's very few fiction books I can listen to in audio format, and that's one of them.
All right. Off we go.
Off we go. Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you next time. Okay,
see how many days until there's another headline that says the metaverse is dead.
Right now we're at 0 days.
0 days.